We are going to explore emotional and social development during the preschool years, roughly ages 3 through 6. We will be examining this content through multiple lenses, including developmental theory, cultural perspectives, cross-cultural considerations, and neurodiversity affirming approaches. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to, first, explain Erikson's initiative versus guilt stage and how it applies across cultures. Second, describe family systems theory and how diverse family structures influence child development. Third, analyze emotional competence through both cultural and neurodiversity affirming lenses. Fourth, evaluate parenting styles with attention to culturally situated outcomes. And fifth, connect play and friendship to social emotional growth across diverse populations. Now let us move into part 1 of our presentation, emotional development. Think of a preschool child as a small scientist of feelings. They are learning to identify, express, and regulate their emotions, and this process is influenced by their biology, family, culture, and unique neurological wiring. We will start by exploring 2 foundational theories, Erikson's psychosocial theory and Adler's individual psychology, before moving into family systems and emotional competence. Let us begin with Erikson's psychosocial theory. During the preschool years, children face the developmental crisis of initiative versus guilt. This is the stage where children are actively exploring their environment and pursuing independent activities. When a child successfully navigates this stage, they develop a sense of purpose and confidence. However, when caregivers are overly controlling or punitive, children may develop excessive guilt about their desires and actions. Here is a helpful metaphor. Think of initiative as a seed. Guilt is not the absence of growth, but rather the result of over-pruning. The caregiver, like a gardener, must know when to guide and when to step back and let the child reach toward the sun. Now, an important cross-cultural consideration. In collectivist cultures, such as many Indigenous, Asian, and Latinx communities, initiative may not look like individual assertion. Instead, it may manifest as contributing to the group, helping family members, or participating in community activities. Research by Marcia and Josselson in 2013 reminds us that healthy identity formation is culturally embedded. Additionally, for neurodivergent children, initiative may manifest as intense interests or unconventional exploration. A child on the autism spectrum who spends an hour meticulously arranging objects is expressing initiative and curiosity, not avoiding engagement. Research by Sid Hu and colleagues in 2021 reminds us that play is diverse, and we must resist narrowing it to what neurotypical frameworks consider functional. Consider the case of 4-year-old Maya, who wants to pour her own juice and spills it. An initiative, supportive response is helping her clean up and encouraging her to try again. A guilt-inducing response would be scolding her for making a mess. Freud's psychosexual stages parallel Erikson's work during this developmental period. Freud proposed that during the phallic stage, roughly ages 3 to 6, children become aware of their bodies and the physical differences between males and females. He introduced the concepts of the Oedipal and Electra complexes, suggesting that children experience tension related to same-gender parent identification. However, it is crucial that we apply a modern critical lens here. Freud's model contains significant anti-female bias and was developed within the specific cultural context of Victorian-era Vienna. These theories reflect heteronormative patriarchal assumptions that do not account for diverse family structures, gender identities, or cultural norms around the world. Contemporary developmental psychology has largely moved beyond these specific constructs. Scholars like Turbin and Ehrensaft in 2018 advocate for models that are more inclusive of two-spirit, non-binary, and gender-diverse children and families. This is particularly relevant when we consider Indigenous communities, where concepts like two-spirit identity have deep cultural roots that predate Western gender binaries. Now let us look at Alfred Adler's individual psychology. Adler believed that personality patterns, which he called lifestyles, shape how we interact with the world. He identified 4 goals of misbehavior in children: attention-seeking, power, revenge, and display of inadequacy. Understanding these goals helps us look beneath a child's behavior to the underlying need. Adler also gave us the crucial C's framework, which states that children need to feel connected, meaning I belong; capable, meaning I can do it; that they count, meaning I matter; and that they have courage, meaning I can try. These four needs are remarkably universal across cultures. Now, Adler also introduced the concept of family constellation and birth order. He suggested that oldest children tend to be high achievers and responsible, second children are competitive and seek uniqueness, and youngest children are often charming and social. However, we must view birth order through a cultural lens. In many indigenous, African, and Asian communities, extended family and communal child-rearing practices mean that birth order dynamics operate very differently from what Adler envisioned. A child raised by grandparents, aunties, uncles, and community members, which is common in many tribal communities, experiences a fundamentally different family constellation than the nuclear family model. Research by Cross and colleagues in 2023 emphasizes that native learning environments prioritize group participation and respect for others, which shifts how these dynamics play out. Family systems theory is a foundational framework for understanding child development. The core idea is that all members of a family are interconnected, like a mobile hanging over a crib. When you touch one piece, every other piece moves. This theory identifies two types of stressors. Horizontal stressors are expected and unexpected developmental events that happen across time, like a child starting preschool or a new sibling being born. Vertical stressors are behavioral and communication patterns passed through generations. For indigenous families, vertical stressors carry a particularly heavy weight. The lasting impacts of boarding school policies, forced removal from families, and cultural disruption are still felt today. Cross and Crossheimer in 2014 documented how historical and intergenerational trauma interrupted the passing down of traditional life skills, parenting practices, and child development knowledge. Today, indigenous communities are working to revitalize these traditional practices. We also need to broaden our definition of family. The definition used in this field includes those connected by biological, psychological, historical, emotional, or economic bonds who see themselves as a household. This inclusive definition honors LGBTQ+ families, kinship care arrangements, grandparent-headed homes, and indigenous community caregiving models, where the entire community shares responsibility for children. For families with neurodivergent children, there are unique stressors to consider, including navigating diagnostic processes, IEP meetings, advocacy within school systems, and the emotional labor of combating stigma. The family life cycle model highlights typical developmental trends across life stages, from single young adults through older adulthood. Early childhood falls within the families with young children phase, which can be very stressful for parents who are juggling childcare, careers, and household management. However, not all families follow a linear life cycle. In many cultures, multi-generational households are the norm, and these stages overlap significantly. From an indigenous perspective, the relational worldview sees child development as cyclical rather than linear, balancing mind, body, spirit, and context. The circumplex model gives us another lens for understanding families by mapping functioning along two dimensions: cohesion, which is how emotionally close family members feel, and flexibility, which is the amount of structure in the family. Balanced families tend to handle stress better. But here is an important cultural caution. What might appear enmeshed or too close in Western terms may actually represent healthy connectedness in collectivist cultures. We must be careful not to pathologize cultural norms that differ from the dominant Western model. Emotional competence is one of the most important developmental achievements of the preschool years. It has three key components. First is emotional awareness, the ability to recognize one's own and others' emotions. It is important to note that cultural variation exists in how emotions are labeled and which emotions are valued. In some cultures, quiet contentment is prized over exuberant happiness. Second is emotional regulation, the ability to manage emotional responses appropriately. For neurodivergent children, emotional regulation may look different. The work of Greaves in 2024 introduced the neural preferencing locus of control model, which proposes that autistic children may develop a different repertoire of regulation strategies because they rely less on social support and more on internal strategies. This is not a deficit. It is a difference that deserves understanding and support. Third is empathy, the ability to understand others' feelings. There is a persistent myth that autistic children lack empathy. However, researcher Damian Milton in 2012 explained that empathy is a two-way street. Rather than lacking empathy, autistic children may express it differently, leading to a breakdown in mutual understanding with neurotypical individuals. Many autistic people report having deep empathy that can actually feel overwhelming. Research by Denham and colleagues in 2023 confirms that self-regulated children respond to social and emotional situations more appropriately, think before they act, and show greater academic success. Let us talk about two big emotions in preschool: fear and anger. Children's fears are usually normative, expected, and short-lived. They are only problematic when they begin to inhibit daily functioning. Common fears across cultures include animals, the dark, blood, thunder, and imaginary beings. For neurodivergent children, sensory-based fears can be especially significant. A child with sensory processing differences might have an intense fear of loud sounds, certain textures, or bright lights that goes beyond typical childhood fear. Regarding anger, a temper tantrum is an explosive external demonstration of an inner emotional state of distress. Research shows that high emotional reactivity combined with low emotional competence is associated with more frequent and intense tantrums. I want to highlight an important distinction here through a case example. 5-year-old Kai has autism and becomes overwhelmed at circle time when the room gets loud. His teacher used to respond by saying, "Use your words." After training in neurodiversity-affirming practices, she now offers noise-reducing headphones and a quiet corner option. The key insight here is distinguishing between a tantrum, which is a goal-directed behavior where a child wants something, and a meltdown, which is a neurological response to sensory or emotional overwhelm. This distinction is critical for all educators and counselors working with young children. Now we transition to Part 2, Social Development. This is where we explore how children learn to navigate relationships, understand gender, develop cultural identity, and become part of their communities. We will look at biological, psychoanalytic, behavioral, and cognitive approaches to understanding social development, with special attention to diversity, cultural context, and neurodivergent experiences. This slide presents the 4 key components of social and emotional awareness. First is self-awareness, the ability to recognize one's own emotions, strengths, and identity. For Indigenous children, cultural identity is foundational. Simard and Blight in 2011 described cultural identity as the foundation from which all other domains of development will grow. Second is social awareness, understanding others' perspectives and showing empathy across cultural differences. The double empathy problem, introduced by Damian Milton in 2012, challenges the deficit view that autistic individuals lack social awareness. Instead, it suggests that communication breakdowns between autistic and neurotypical individuals are a two-way problem. Third is relationship skills, including communication, cooperation, and conflict resolution. Play is the primary vehicle for developing these skills in preschool. And fourth is responsible decision-making, which involves making constructive choices about behavior. Our expectations here must account for both cultural and neurodevelopmental context. Biological approaches to understanding gender development tend to view male and female differences as natural, normal, and necessary. The man-as-hunter hypothesis, for example, associated males with aggression, ambition, leadership, and technological innovation. However, these approaches risk reinforcing gender essentialism and ignoring the rich diversity of gender expression across cultures. Many Indigenous cultures, including numerous Native American nations, recognize gender identities well beyond the binary. Two-spirit identity, as well as specific tribal terms like Winkte in Lakota culture or Nadli in Navajo culture, carry deep social respect and spiritual significance. These are not modern concepts, but traditional ones with deep roots. Contemporary neuroscience provides a more nuanced picture. Research by Joel and Fausto Sterling in 2016 shows that brain development is shaped by experience, not just biology. The concept of neuroplasticity demonstrates that the preschool brain is remarkably malleable, and gender differences in behavior are best understood as the interaction between biology, environment, culture, and individual variation. Now let us examine two more theories of gender development side by side. Psychoanalytic theory, rooted in Freud, proposes that during the phallic stage, children become aware of genital differences and identify with the same gender parent in a traditional nuclear family model. However, this theory carries significant anti-female bias and does not account for diverse family structures, same-gender parents, or non-binary identities. Behavioral theory suggests that children learn gender-appropriate behavior by observing same-gender adult models. By ages 2 to 3, children develop a gender identity and the ability to recognize their own gender. Through classical conditioning and reinforcement, children who behave in gender-appropriate ways are rewarded, while non-conforming behaviors are often punished. A limitation of this perspective is that it views children as overly passive in their socialization. And an important cultural note: what counts as gender-appropriate varies dramatically across cultures. The behaviors that are reinforced or discouraged are deeply embedded in cultural context. Cognitive development theory offers a different perspective on gender. It proposes that children first develop a cognitive understanding of gender and then learn to behave accordingly. Children actively look for themes and patterns to understand why others act as they do, then make decisions as active participants in the socialization process. This theory identifies three important lenses or assumptions. First is gender polarization, our tendency to divide the world into male or female categories. Many cultures, as we discussed with indigenous two-spirit identities, recognize more than two genders. Second is androcentrism, the tendency to view masculine qualities as superior to feminine ones. This bias continues to persist in educational and clinical settings, where active, assertive behaviors are often valued over quiet, nurturing ones. Third is biological essentialism, the tendency to ground gender differences in biology, making them seem natural and inevitable. Modern research increasingly challenges this assumption, showing that gender differences are far more influenced by culture and socialization than by biology alone. Now let us examine how diversity and intersectionality shape social development. The meanings and implications of gender are profoundly different depending on whether a child is rich or poor, of a particular racial or ethnic background, or belongs to a specific cultural community. Preschool children are generally more aware of gender differences than of ethnic identity or social class, though this awareness develops rapidly. Ethnic categories are cultural constructs that must be learned, and social class shapes children's experiences dramatically. Children from different socioeconomic backgrounds often have very different preschool experiences. There is an unfortunate tendency in mainstream society to pathologize poverty, rather than addressing the systemic inequities that create it. Identity development requires extended experiences with people from different backgrounds. For Indigenous children, cultural identity serves as a powerful protective factor. Research by Harrison and colleagues in 2019 shows that participation in cultural practices, learning traditional language, and maintaining connection to community all build resilience. For neurodivergent children, identity development may include navigating both disability identity and cultural identity simultaneously, adding layers of complexity that require sensitive, affirming support from educators and counselors. The environments where children spend their days have a profound impact on socialization. There are three main types of care arrangements. Home-based care, provided by a family member or in another home, is the most common and least expensive. It often provides continuity with family culture and values. Child care centers, which is what most people think of when they hear daycare, range widely in quality and approach. However, the average cost of center-based care can be $500 to $800 or more per month, creating significant barriers for low-income families. And inclusive settings, where neurodivergent children learn alongside neurotypical peers, have benefits for everyone. Research shows that neurotypical children in inclusive environments develop stronger empathy, patience, and compassion. Meanwhile, neurodivergent children benefit from having social models and being part of the community. The key takeaway is that there is no one-size-fits-all arrangement. Each family and child has unique needs shaped by culture, economics, neurodevelopmental profile, and community context. Baumrinn's parenting styles framework identifies 4 approaches. Authoritarian parenting combines high demands with low warmth. Parents actively attempt to shape and control a child's behavior through strict rules. In Western contexts, this style may produce anxiety or rebellion. Authoritative parenting combines high demands with high warmth. Parents provide structure and direction while still allowing freedom, exploration, and self-expression. Western research consistently shows this style produces the best outcomes for children. Permissive parenting features low demands with high warmth. Parents are accepting, affirmative, and tolerant, making few demands and rarely punishing. This may result in poorer self-regulation skills. Uninvolved parenting is characterized by low demands and low warmth, with a lack of communication and affection. This style is associated with the poorest outcomes across cultures. However, here is a critical cultural caveat. The authoritative parenting model was validated primarily on white, middle-class samples. Research with African American, Asian American, and indigenous families reveals different dynamics. For example, what appears authoritarian in white middle-class contexts may be protective and effective in communities where children face racism or other systemic threats. In indigenous communities, collective parenting by extended family and community means that individual parenting style is just one part of a much larger system of care. Play is perhaps the most powerful vehicle for social and emotional development in preschool children. Let us look at the types of play and their significance. Parallel play is when children play side by side without direct interaction. This is not a deficit but a developmental stage, and for some neurodivergent children, it may be a preferred and comfortable play style that should be respected. Simple social play involves open, active, and intentional efforts to cooperate and create shared play activities. Imaginative or pretend play requires a sharing of assumptions about behaviors and roles. A 2025 systematic review by Varaxa and colleagues found that pretend play has the greatest potential for emotional development among all types of play. And play therapy uses symbolic play for therapeutic purposes. Research by Chauhan and colleagues in 2024 affirmed that play therapy provides a safe, non-judgmental space for emotional exploration and is effective across diverse populations. An important note about neurodivergent play. Many neurodivergent play styles are unfortunately dismissed as non-functional or concerning. However, research by Sidhu and colleagues in 2021 reminds us that play is diverse and should be defined by the child, not by adult expectations. Repetitive play sequences may provide comfort and mastery. Intense focus on one type of play reflects deep interest, not rigidity. And parallel play may be preferred and should not be forced into social play prematurely. Friendships are a vital part of preschool social development. As children grow older, more and more of their play activities involve others, forming the basis of friendships. One fascinating concept here is fragile interactional frames and access rituals. Joining others who are already playing requires a repertoire of social skills to overcome peer resistance. This is challenging for all preschoolers, but can be especially difficult for neurodivergent children who may process social cues differently. Younger children tend to define friendship simply as whoever they are currently playing with. Over time, they develop more abstract and permanent notions of what friendship means. Play activities serve three major developmental functions. Children learn to share and cooperate in groups, they learn to deal with common fears and conflict, and they challenge adult authority and rules. From a cross-cultural perspective, research shows that children in diverse preschool settings who interact with peers from different cultural backgrounds develop enhanced emotional intelligence and better social adaptability. And for neurodivergent children, friendships may look different, perhaps fewer but deeper connections, and educators can support friendship development through structured social opportunities and peer buddy systems. This slide is especially close to my heart as we explore Indigenous perspectives on child development. Indigenous communities often conceptualize wellness through a relational worldview, understanding that a person's well-being involves a balance of mind, body, spirit, and context. This is fundamentally different from the linear, stage-based models that dominate Western developmental psychology. Community caregiving is central to Indigenous child rearing. Children are raised with collective responsibility, not just by parents, but by the entire community. A study by Waters and colleagues published in 2024 in the journal Child Development described how a child learning to gather berries with an elder is simultaneously developing cognitive, emotional, spiritual, and social skills through kinship and reciprocity. Cultural identity serves as the foundation from which all other developmental domains grow. Simard and Blight in 2011 described how attachment to cultural values, teachings, language, sacred traditions, land, and shared history provides a protective foundation. However, we must also acknowledge the devastating impact of historical trauma. Boarding school policies and forced family separations disrupted the passing down of traditional parenting knowledge across generations. Today, Indigenous communities are actively working to revitalize these practices, and this work is both healing and transformative. Based on everything we have covered, here are 4 key recommendations for practice. First, implement culturally responsive social-emotional counseling practices. This means integrating cultural values, stories, and practices, moving beyond Eurocentric norms of what emotional competence looks like. Second, adopt neurodiversity-affirming approaches. Focus on strengths rather than deficits, accommodate sensory needs, respect diverse play styles, and avoid pathologizing neurological differences. Third, practice inclusive family engagement by honoring diverse family structures, involving extended family and community members, and truly listening to families' cultural goals for their children. And fourth, embrace land-based and experiential learning. Indigenous land-based wellness approaches, which involve children connecting with nature and community, have been shown to promote well-being for all children, not just Indigenous children. Let us review our key takeaways. First, emotional and social development are deeply interconnected and culturally embedded. We cannot understand one without the other, and we cannot understand either without considering cultural context. Second, Western developmental theories provide valuable frameworks, but they must be applied with cultural humility and critical thinking. Not every theory applies universally. Third, neurodivergent children have valid, diverse developmental pathways that deserve respect and support, not correction to a neurotypical standard. Fourth, family systems vary widely. There is no single model of healthy family functioning, and we must resist pathologizing families that do not fit the Western nuclear model. Fifth, play is the most powerful vehicle for social-emotional learning in preschool. All types of play, including neurodivergent play styles, serve developmental functions. And sixth, cultural identity and community connection are protective factors for all children, and they deserve to be nurtured and supported by educators and counselors. This slide contains the first page of our references. All sources cited in this presentation are listed here for your review and further reading. This is the continuation of our references. I encourage you to explore these sources, particularly the work by Waters and colleagues on Indigenous perspectives on the child-caregiver bond, and the systematic review by Viraxa and colleagues on the power of play for emotional development. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through emotional and social development in the preschool years. I hope this presentation has given you not only a solid understanding of the major theories and concepts, but also a deeper appreciation for how culture, community, and neurodiversity shape every child's developmental path. Remember, every child's emotional and social journey is unique, shaped by culture, community, neurology, and love. As counselors, our role is not to force children into a single developmental mold, but to understand, support, and celebrate the diverse pathways they take. Thank you.